Welcome to my podcast, Shaping Your Journey. My name is Aldo Mazza, percussionist, drummer, and artistic director of Cosa Music, inviting you to join in conversations with friends, artists, professionals, and experts in our music world. Today, I have the incredible pleasure of finally having Mr. Peter Erskine, one of my favorite drummers and people I've known for a few years, actually many years, and actually we had the pleasure of working with my group. But before we go into the Shaping Your Journey ideas and conversation, Peter, if you wouldn't mind, just saying a few words about your very, very beginning. What triggered it for you? What was that moment that made you start this journey?
Wow, you played into my my plans. We didn't speak about this beforehand, folks, but I'm here in my studio and I have a multi-camera setup, and one of the inputs is an iPad, and I just happen to have this photo sitting there as I was testing the output of the iPad, and that's a photograph of myself. Obviously, you can tell by the name on the bass drum, if not by some vague physical resemblance. Yeah, you can tell by the left-hand grip. There you go. And that's my drum teacher, Johnny Severa. This was in Atlantic City, New Jersey, back in 1960. And if you look at the bottom of the bass drum, that front head, you can see my father's hand. You see that?
Yes.
And he came up because he noticed that the bass drum was creeping. So I started taking lessons when I was 5. I'm 68 years old now, so I've been playing the drums for over 60 years. Still learning about the instrument, learning about music, learning about myself. All these things are connected. It's been a wonderful way to go through life. Aldo, the long answer short, it just seemed like I knew that this was what I wanted to do from a pretty early age.
Yes, and I mean, it's amazing what happens to us. I mean, I didn't start at 5 years old, and not a lot of people have that I know. But you've always been kind of in the picture, and when I realized you were also in the Stan Kenton camps, and I tried to go one year, and for some reason I was not able, because I used to go to drum camps and all kinds of camps every summer. Everything I could get my hands on, I was just hungry when I suddenly discovered that was a thing, and you could attend. But I did go to some of the other camps, like the Jamie Abersold and the big band camps, many other camps.
Well, these were outgrowths of the Kenton camps. Now, the first summer music camps that were part of this whole National Stage Band Camp movement took place, to the best of my knowledge, in 1959. Michigan State University was one of the campuses. I went to my first camp in 1961. Now, my teacher, John Severa, had heard about this camp, and he told my mother about it and said, this might be a great place for Peter. And she wrote a letter to the camp in his name and didn't tell him. He received a phone call. They were intrigued. I'm sure that her letter was must have piqued their interest. I'm sure it was filled with lots of hyperbole about me. At any rate, he caught on quickly enough and sort of continued the masquerade, and it was set up for me to attend this camp. Now, I grew up in New Jersey. This was a 2-day drive, and this was before the American interstate highway system was nearly completed. So a fairly arduous drive for my family. Um, After over 2 days of driving, when the camp uh, administrators realized how young I was, they were like, "Whoa, he's too young." The camp was set up for high schoolers, but someone luckily had the foresight or imagination uh, to connect me to Stan Kenton, and they said I would be auditioning for Stan that evening. I just turned 7. Um, Stan, of course, invited the local newspaper and a photographer, and it was more of a press opportunity. I think they had every intention of letting me stay, and they found a room in a dormitory where I could stay with my parents. So I was a nifty little news item. Um, and I'll just go back to the Zoom here. The first performance I did, um, the gentleman on the right was a tenor saxophonist named Sam Donahue. Um, Marvin Stamm is just to the left of me, standing behind me. Um, this was before he joined the Kenton Band. He was still a student at North Texas. So North Texas, they were kind of the resident college band there. Um, there was the 1 o'clock band. We had lab bands. You couldn't use the word jazz back in those days, not in academia at any rate. So this began a series of that's me at that first camp with Lewis Hayes.
Wow.
Nice Rogers drum set. This is the next year, 1962, and I'm playing with Donald Byrd. So how lucky could a
Wow.
young drummer be? And so this was my jazz fix. I spent the rest of the year taking lessons and just listening to lots of albums, listening to the music. And then in the summer, I'd get to be around these grown-up jazz heroes. And I grew to love these men. And in the great tradition of jazz, they shared not only what they knew about the music, but they shared their love of the music. So I was a very, very extremely fortunate young drummer to have the support of my family and to kind of be welcomed into really the heart of this music education movement so early on.
And then at some point you went to Indiana. I remember because we had at the COSA camps, we had your teacher, who was one of our faculty people. What age were you
George
at,
Gaber. Well,
Mr. Haber?
Here's high school. Let me just. So before Indiana, I was a student at the Interlochen Arts Academy. That's me with the particularly smarmy expression.
Nice.
And it was at Interlochen where I really got to dive very deeply both into the classical music worlds, playing in the orchestra there, and the jazz program. And there was a gentleman named Dave Sporney. He is still active. He leads the Amherst Jazz Orchestra in Massachusetts. But I probably learned more about big band drumming from him, even though he was a trombone player, because when he would rehearse the band and he would sing the brass or saxophone figures to those musicians, he would, he would sing like the drum fills that he heard in his head, and I thought, well, those sound pretty good. So I got an idea pretty early on of what the other musicians in a big band liked or would like. And I think whenever we're learning about music, the musician enjoys a particular advantage if he or she is taught what the other musicians like or don't like. A lot of times we just have to learn these things through experience. Sometimes it's painful experience. Um, but it reminds me of a conversation I had a few years ago. I met this young Wunderkind conductor who had graduated from the Sibelius Academy in Helsinki. And he was yet another incredible Finnish conductor. The best known probably being Esa-Pekka Salonen. I'm sorry, I forget this conductor's name. But I asked him, I said, why are there so many good conductors coming out of Finland? This was a conversation, we're drinking beers, we're having dinner. So it was almost a rhetorical question, but he answered it quite seriously. He said, because at the Sibelius Academy, we conduct an orchestra every week. We don't just conduct a piano player. So we find out very quickly what the orchestra musicians like and what they don't like. So when we get in front of a professional orchestra, we've gotten a lot of that out of the way and into our system. So not a bad thing to keep in mind if anyone's listening to this who's designing curriculum. And it's what I try to teach in my lessons, particularly at the University of Southern California, trying to prepare the students. These are the things that will endear you to others, and these are the things you might best avoid.
Right. And it's interesting that sometimes, you mentioned that you were playing a lot to records. Was that a regular thing that you picked up, or your teacher said you should be playing along with records?
There was just no other way to play. There weren't that many other musicians in the town where I grew up. There were a few older ones that occasionally would humor me by playing with me. Both my older sisters seemed to have a fondness for dating jazz musicians. So occasionally, one or the other, they'd play a little bit with me just to, so I wouldn't be a pest.
That's a good one. I hadn't heard that one before, but that's helpful.
But playing with albums was good. Now, this is an unpaid mention, or I don't mean it to be an advertisement, but Dave Weckl showed me an app at the during the most recent PASIC conference, and it's called Moises, spelled like noises but with an M, and it uses artificial intelligence to take any stereo track, you feed it. And they're also very careful about copyright. If it's a commercial recording, it wants to see that you've purchased it legitimately. Then it takes this and it isolates vocals, bass, drums, and backing track.
Beautiful.
So it takes a stereo track and turns it into a multi-track, multi-stemmed mix. I don't know how it works. But it's pretty darn effective. So Dave told me that he found this track that someone had pre-processed on somewhere on the internet of Buddy Rich playing "Love for Sale" with this big band, and it's minus the drums.
Wow.
So he said playing that with just the horns and not hearing Buddy. You really get a sense of how that band felt the time. Now, it's always a one-way street when you do a play along.
Right.
The play along doesn't react to what you do. So, at a certain point, I remember, I think it was Ed Soph who cautioned me. He said, you don't rely too much just on doing this, because you are not. He detected, he said, I'm not getting a sense that you're leading the band. You're following the band just like you're following a recording. And this was in 1966. I was 12 years old, and this was the beginning of aha. I need to uh, become the musician that provides the rhythmic information to the band and doesn't just play alongside.
Right. And it's I mean it's interesting you mentioned Buddy Rich with the big band. One thing that I always enjoyed because I watched Buddy many times when he used to come through and I listened to the records. One thing that was, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I always found was he was, of course, he was leading the band and reacting to the band, but not so much reacting to the band, but being within the notes. It was like he was playing pool with the notes and playing in and out and pressing and preparing them. And one day it just dawned on me that that's what he was doing. Am I wrong in thinking that?
I haven't heard it put that way, but no, it doesn't sound wrong at all. Um, this might be the same thing. I was again the same conversation with Dave Weckl, and I was praising Dave, which is not too hard to do because he is so
Yes.
incredible. Um, I said, David, it occurred to me recently. I was trying to figure out a little bit of what makes Buddy's drumming so unique, and the obvious features of his technical mastery, the kinetic excitement, um, just the sheer force of musical personality. But uh, on a mechanical drumming level, I said it seems like the music that was written for his band and the way he interpreted that music um, was entirely unique. Um, and a lot of this had to do with the motor, the amount of snare drumming. It was very snare drum centric, and the amount
Mhm.
of the involvement of the bass drum. I said I think he was leading up towards this when I look at video clips of him playing with the Harry James band on that same Rogers drum set the year or two before he started his band. He's getting there with it, but he really refined it into this. Um, I would call it a kind of a motor-driven uh, manner of playing. And I said, Dave, you're really the next drummer. I said, you're doing the same thing, particularly with your hands. I said it takes technical ability beyond what I ever would imagine to be able to do. Um, to do that. And Dave said, "Well, yeah, Buddy was a very big influence." And he said, "That's exactly what I try to do." So when Dave plays, there's a lot of motor activity happening with the hands. Um,
Right.
Now, I'm not making an excuse or copping out. Uh, uh, Number one, I can't do it. Um, so I admire it to the ends of my drumming earth. But for me, I'm kind of more interested in the little more open architectural way of playing, uh, and I can only ascribe that to the influence that I had listening to early Max Roach and Joe Morello, as well as Art Blakey. These drummers. Uh, uh, Made pretty clear melodic statements when they played.
Right.
And I just found it very appealing. In fact, the Rich versus Roach, where Buddy's playing, now his time playing, it hasn't gotten to the point of, I think, the way he played with this big band, for example. But in his soloing, um, Buddy lets fly on the snare drum, um, and it's exciting and it's great. And as a kid, I was maybe 5 or 6 years old when I heard this. I was like, wow, that's amazing. But then it was Max Roach's turn, and boom, ba boom, ba ba doop boop, ba do da da ba do da da. I was like, I could do that. That seemed within the realm of possibility. Um, Not that I could do it as hip as Max Roach, but it seemed attainable, and uh, and so I was always attracted more to that. And even when I would run into other drummers, if they were coming from the Buddy thing, um, it just didn't register with me. Uh, and I loved listening to those records of Buddy, and yeah, I do even more so now. I marvel at them, um, but it was never. Um, I was just never able to play that way, um, and I'm trying to bring this back
Sure,
to
sure.
George Gaber, who you brought up directly slash indirectly, and I apologize for going off on the tangent, but uh, you know, Gaber from my first meeting with him, which was back in 1965, um, and he was the only reason I decided to go to Indiana. And now Indiana had a great jazz program led by the late David Baker, um,
Yes, yes.
and that was another reason to want to go there. But it, I chose Indiana because of George Gaber. And lately at USC, when I meet with uh, young, it was students who are applying, um, I would ask, how many other schools have you applied to? And USC might be one of 8, 9, 10 colleges. Um, and so they can, they spread out their chances. And it was just funny because I only applied to one school. I applied to Indiana. I knew that my grades were good enough to get me into the place. Um, and I knew that Gaber wanted me to come there, so I didn't worry about getting accepted into the music school. Um, there was no guarantee I was going to get into the jazz band, but my audition for the jazz band, and I had worked with David Baker in a couple of summer camps, but he put, I think it was ornithology or confirmation, the lead sheet, uh, in front of me at the drum set. He goes, play that. So I played the melody, and he said, okay, you're in the band.
Yeah, David was a staple at the Jamie Aebersold camps, and I had the
Uh,
good fortune of working with him. He's a what a character, what a beautiful man. Yeah,
yes, he was wonderful. His enthusiasm for the music and I remember every rehearsal, he'd start dancing in front of the drums. He'd look at me and he'd say, free it up, try to get me to be a little more
yeah,
adventurous. And you know, he made you feel good about the way you played. And that's a priceless quality in a teacher. Gaber, uh, it was an interesting relationship that I had with him because I was uh, one, if maybe one of the only students who didn't follow the written or unwritten syllabus that he had for most of the other students. Most of the other students were terrified, and they had to play the Phil Krause mallet thing, and there was a pair of pages that were just demonic in their
the,
complexity
the
and
terror
how.
pages.
It,
Yes.
and I never had to do that, but Gabriel was, he knew what he wanted to work on with me, and it all had to do with touch. And we had gotten to a pretty good place. Then I went on the road for 3 years with the Stan Kenton Band. Um, I'll just continue. This is fun. So now there I am with the Kenton Band. Um, by the by the time I returned back to college after 3 years on the road, um, he was shocked at how heavy-handed my touch had gotten. So we spent most of that year. There's an anecdote I tell. I'm sure many of the listeners are familiar with the great drummer Kenny Aronoff. Um, Kenny was the number one uh, classical percussionist at the school that year. He was the top dog. Um, or hot, what do they call it? Top Gun?
Yeah, the Top Gun, I suppose. Yes.
Is that what they? Is that the name of that movie? Top Gun?
Uh, Top was it Top? Yeah, well, I think it was Top Gun. Was
Hot
that?
Shot or Top Gun? Whatever. Anyway, Kenny was pretty much considered the number one, and he was a timpanist in the top orchestra.
Great
Didn't play
mallet
that
player.
much drums back in the day, but yeah, great mallet player. I mean, he was,
Yeah.
and Gaber put me in the section, and so I think I was this one concert I was playing tempo blocks. Kenny's playing timpani, and afterwards, Professor Gaber comes up to the stage and he goes up to Kenny and shakes his hand and great job, bravo. And he goes, there was a percussionist, her name Judy Moonert, who taught at Western Michigan for many years. And he goes to Judy, bravo, great job. So I'm waiting for my bravo. It seems like everyone's getting a bravo, great job. And he comes to me and he just says, I want to see you in my office first thing tomorrow morning. And he walks by. Like, well, gosh, that wasn't what I expected. Um, so I thought about it, and then the next morning I knock on his office door, and he opened it, and I'm looking like, what's up? And he said, why are you hitting those things so hard? What's going on? And I remember one lesson, Aldo. I was doing some practice pad etudes, and he stopped me, and he held up a triangle beater, and I went over to the desk and picked it up, and he pointed to a mounted triangle in the corner of the room. Excuse me. And he said, mezzo piano, you get one chance. So ding, with a cigar, and he just shook his head side to side. He went, too loud. He said, now get out.
Wow.
That was my lesson. So, you want to see what I practiced for that whole week?
Yes.
I'll move that. Sorry, I'll start again. And that was just a kind of hurried demonstration with a drumstick with not a perfect tip. Anyway, control and tone production and playing softly, and then that really began my sort of grown up search for getting a better sound. And you can have you can look at a map and you can decide, I want to go there, but you can't just snap your fingers and go there. That journey can take a long time. And since we're talking about journey, it was many years of playing, self-analysis, listening to recordings, getting feedback, some solicited, some not, and then ultimately finding a way that worked and finding a way of playing music that was kind of soul satisfying, and also enabled me to play in a number of different settings.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, and I remember Gaber when we had him and it was one of the reasons why we invited him at COSA, because he was one of those traditional teachers, if you will, who he was like, I would call those people, Pierre Beluse, who was my teacher, was the same type. They're like the gatekeeper. If you want to get past this point, this is unsaid, but if you want to get past this point professionally, musically, and otherwise, this is what's needed. And here it is. You get one chance. And to get to that, the amount of work and the amount of conscious effort that one has to put in. I went through it. I mean, Pierre Beluse broke me down completely. I mean, I would be in tears because you'd play, and then it's okay. Now listen to that again. Does that make sense? Are you bashing, or does it feel smooth? Is there nuance? Are you screaming all the time? Does that drum or that instrument sing? So it took a long time to get to the point. I remember doing the Delecluze etudes. I spent 1 year on the first etude. I couldn't get past, meaning we went so deep into the nuance, the control that you're talking about exactly. And that's a point well taken, and that probably was a turning point. I mean, it certainly was for me, and anyone who's gone through that with anybody who takes the interest and the effort in putting somebody in a position to make them understand that that's what's needed if you want to go where you think you want to go. That's what it takes.
Well,
Uh,
I mean, the Delacluse is that's very challenging. You know, my freshman year, we were working on two things. One was I wanted to learn match grip, and that was not a thing that he had taught on snare drum. So he was intrigued, and he was like, he said, let's work on this together. Um, and so we spent a year, very basic stuff. At the same time, um, for technical challenges, uh, he had me working out of the Albright Contemporary Studies for Snare Drum, and these were good fun. And then all of a sudden, he just said, "You know what? Get out your Podemsky, the Benjamin Podemsky. It's a very
yes.
basic snare drum method." He
Yes.
said, "Turn to page 25," and I did. Um, and he said, "Okay, now," and I'm like, "Wow, quarter notes, eighth notes, piece of cake." And he goes, each of those snaps is a measure. One, two, one, two, one, two, one, two. He said, now play it. And of course, you know, about three lines down, I crashed and burned.
Yes.
Um, and kind of the same thing, Aldo. He said, I want you to be able to play that and anything else in the book at that tempo without any mistakes next week. He said, see ya, get out. Later, I began to
Brutal.
wonder. I said, maybe he had to like call his insurance agent or something. Um, but uh, boy, uh, you know, it's a good bet that what did I do? I started working on sight reading, and I began uh, uh, looking at it like, all right, what does it take to sight read? Obviously, you need to be able to recognize rhythms, but when you have a measure that looks it has an unexpected combination of rest, particularly in the center of the measure. Um, Often the clue to what's going on is the rhythm at the end of the measure, you know, because it's all math, it all adds up.
Right.
So it's like a kind of what did I call it? Quick sum. I forget. It was anyway. A lot of times when I'm sight reading, I'll go to the end of the measure and work backwards as I'm looking ahead. So, you know, I try to be at least two measures ahead of where I am. We always talk about be in the moment, but with sight reading, you have to look ahead and you have to jump down to the next line or you have to jump to the next page. So there are no surprises. Um, in fact, at the beginning of the pandemic, um, uh, I I made face masks. I ordered them, and I had one of the graphic designers that works with our record label, um, Mark Beecher. I don't. Do you know Mark?
I don't know, Mark. No.
He's the president of the National Association of Rudimental Drummers,
Okay.
and he and his wife are also both terrific graphic designers. Um, but I said, Mark, can we come up with a you know good looking uh, instead of Aldo, it's Alba, Abla actually, Abla.
Habla.
Always be looking ahead. So he came up with this very catchy graphic that um, I think would work better on a T-shirt, on a face mask. It's frightening to see that on his face.
As long as
I
you
handed
didn't
it out
put.
to all the students. I thought of I sent them in the mail to them and said, here's a face mask for you to remind you. Always be looking ahead. Um, uh, but always good advice when you're reading or anything else in life. I guess the other way to put it is to concentrate.
Yeah, yes, but the reading ahead, I mean, what he made you do it, and it's interesting, and I think it's important to have people like that who will push you, show you the way, but be supportive, of course. And I mean, after you graduated from Indiana, what was the first thing you did? Did you go
Who
back to?
graduated?
Oh, you didn't graduate.
No, 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 no.
Oh,
I spent 1 year there, and it really should have been my senior year in high school. I got out of Interlochen Arts Academy 1 year early. Uh, I took summer courses. I'm not really sure what my hurry was. It might have been because my girlfriend was going to be graduating that year, so I didn't want to be there without her. But she went to a different school. I went to Indiana, and then after 1 year, I went on the road with the Stan Kenton Band. I wanted to go back to school, and my plan was to finish college. Uh, and Maynard Ferguson called, and they called me 3 times, and I turned them down each time. I just said, no, I want to, I'm sure it'd be fun, but I don't want to leave school. And then the fourth time they said, look, can you just do the summer tour? We need a drummer, and Maynard's really interested to have you play. Um, I'm sure they used a little flattery. Um, and they said you could be back. You could be back the day before registration, or the final day of registration. We can get you back to Indiana. And I said, okay, that sounds fair. Um, and then in the middle of the first set, the first night I was playing with Maynard, I knew I wasn't going to go back to school. I was just having too much fun being back in the saddle again with the big band. So Gabriel
right.
was quite disappointed, um, but we always remained in touch. And so you're speaking to a college dropout. Uh, but luckily, Berkeley College came to the rescue and they awarded me an honorary Doctor of Music degree. So
So that's handy. I
that,
think
that comes in handy, sure.
yes, I think I saw you with Maynard Ferguson's band. Did you play Montreal?
Well,
Yes,
Maynard was originally from Montreal,
yes, I
so
know, I
we
know.
played. We played. I know we played the Place des Arts,
That's right. That's
uh,
right.
and we played a concert in the Olympic Village. This was 1976,
76, right?
um, and that was pretty exciting to to be in the Olympic Village. I remember the cafeteria was the largest cafeteria I'd ever seen, and they had more food. Uh, I was just astonished, and how high quality it all seemed to be. Of course, I was only 21, but um, or
Yeah.
21 or 22. It was pretty cool. Actually, I was 22 by then. Um,
No, that was
uh,
great. I was just gonna interject that whole year of 76. I mean, I actually played the opening ceremonies of the Olympics in the stadium to
wow.
90,000 people. I was still a student, and I mean they were hiring like everybody for different things, different situations, and the village. Beautiful, those triangular buildings that, yes,
Yes, which I heard an interesting uh, uh, bit of trivia about. So these kind of triangular shaped uh, buildings where they were housing, I think, athletes.
yes,
Then they sold them
as
uh,
condos.
as condos. But the
Yes,
problem is when it snowed, the person in the top thing would shovel the snow over to the the next balcony, which was budding out from, and then
yes,
they had twice as much snow, and then the balcony beneath them all of a sudden had 3 times the amount of snow. So
yes. Oh, it's still
no
a
one, no, because it was a Summer Olympics, I don't think anyone factored in snow.
no, and the actual designer, the architect, the original architect for that was a gentleman by the name of Taibert from Paris. So I don't think they even considered snow. And there was, there was, I don't think he had been. I mean, there are all kinds of backstories to all of this. We can go on and on
So,
about that one.
what did they wind up doing? How did they resolve that? Because there was a snow issue with that building, right?
Oh yes, I'm not sure. I think they did some remodeling because the sides have sides like this, and I think they had to fix that. Also, the same problem with the stadium itself, because the original roof was a retracting roof, but it was a material that we used to tear. So that roof was replaced 3 or 4 times. It was it was one of those. Projects, unending. It was incredible.
Yeah, sports, boy, and now in Qatar and all these it's just crazy. I
Yes.
wish. One thing I'll say for Canada, and this has nothing to do with the Olympics, but these beautiful concert halls in every province, and and the only reason I got to know them so well was because with Maynard, that was one of the easier bookings. So we would uh, at some point every year we would kind of go east to west and play in one of these after another.
Right.
And in subsequent years, a lot of jazz festivals are often held in these terrific halls. Um, so Canada has always been a place I've admired for many reasons. I love the people, but also their commitment to the arts seems more akin to what you find in Europe than what you find
Sure.
south of
Of
the
course. Of
border.
course. Yeah. The one thing, getting back to Maynard, when he used to come back home, he would come to Montreal often to do a concert, and it would be a funny thing from the stage. And you might remember, he always used to say at the end of his concert, "I'll see you at 4:06." And of course, most people wouldn't know what that meant. But those of
Area
us
code, right?
musicians who are in the musicians union, that's local 4:06.
Oh, is that local forest thing? I thought maybe it was the area code or something.
No, and that
Oh,
meant because the musicians union at the time had owned a building and had a big bar where they would have jam sessions and all of those kinds of things. So we would all gather after the concert, and he would meet everybody there.
mm.
It became like a club, the
Well,
hang.
he never invited me.
You're probably too young. No, I'm just kidding.
Maybe he did. Maynard was very generous. I will say, and uh, uh, only because it's true that Maynard really was, I think, the best boss I ever had. I'll tell you an anecdote.
Yeah.
When I joined the band, uh, like for any big band, you did all the touring, and it was not easy. You know, riding the bus for so many hours every day. Um, the cookie or the reward would be getting to play on the album, and it usually be a live album, or you'd go into the studio and you would play live. Well, Maynard was enjoying some success with albums that were produced by Bob James, and then later an arranger named Jay Chataway, who kind of came up through that production school, um, and they they used a New York rhythm section, and they used New York horn players, and this was a departure, and because the record label CBS. They were selling a lot of albums. They decided to pursue this approach or this formula. So one of the albums, this was before I had joined, was done that way, and the band was grumbling. Some of the guys weren't so happy about it. I didn't really have that much of a dog in that fight. I was new, and hey, whatever, was fine. Um, we go into the studio in New York, and the guys have been complaining to uh, to Maynard, or he's aware of the complaints. So he gives us a chance to play, and speaking just drum wise, uh, this was the first time I ever worked with a click track, and
Okay.
I like to joke that didn't seem to be working that day because they kept speeding up and slowing down. Uh, so we didn't know what we were doing, and we had no idea how to play for the microphone, which is a different art, and playing a quote unquote commercial track. We would hit the stage. It was all about excitement. Um, we were an excellent road band, but we just weren't a very good studio band by any means. Um, This necessitates, more reliance on the studio players, and then more of the guys are starting to complain. I happened to run into my old boss Stan Kenton in New York, um, and the very capable Harvey Mason is is doing the bulk of the album, and also Alan Schwartzberg worked on that. It was a record
Yes.
called Conquistador. Um, so if you anyone who thinks that's me playing drums on Maynard's hit uh, single version of Rocky, that's not me. That was Alan Schwartzberg, and then Harvey did a lot of the drumming. And if you can hear it. At any rate, I run into Stan Kenton, and he's like, "What are you doing?" We had coffee or something, and you I said, well, we're making an album. He goes, well, why are you having coffee with me? Why aren't you in the studio? I said, well, Maynard, they're doing it with studio musicians. And I think Stan took it upon himself to call Maynard and give him a little bit of a finger wagging, like, Maynard, you shouldn't do that. You should. So now he's not only gotten it from, a couple guys in the band, he gets it from Stan. All right, we leave New York, we're on tour, and we play a concert somewhere, and the band is invited to go to a reception afterwards. Instead of the 406 in Montreal, it was a music fraternity on some
Okay.
college campus. Oh, but meanwhile, I'm packing up my drums, and a kid comes up and, hey, I like the concert, thanks. So the new record is Maynard going. Are you guys going to be on it? Or are you going to be studio musicians? And I just, putting the tom tom in the case, I said, studio musicians. Without any attitude, I just answered the kid's question. So apparently, this kid confronts Maynard as Maynard's about to get on the bus. Hey, it's really, that's a drag. You're using studio musicians or something. So Maynard's had it. Um, now the kid didn't say that I had told him, and
Okay.
and Maynard is sure there was one brass player who I think was really stirring up the hornet's nest about this stuff. Anyway, sorry, it's a long story, but we're all in a good mood. We have some guests on the bus. They're directing us to the thing, and um, I might even have had a girl sitting on my knee, because there were more people on the bus than there were seats. And Maynard gets on the microphone, and we're like, oh, this will be good. This will be good. Because whenever Maynard would get on the mic, it would always be something kind of amusing. We all admired him, really worshipped him. Um, and he goes, yeah, this is the captain speaking. And so okay, this is going to be funny. Um, and he says, yeah, did anyone happen to mention that studio musicians were working on the new album? So I just raised my hand, like, yeah, that was me. and Maynard just, okay, you've heard the Buddy tapes, right?
Yes, yes.
This was worse than the Buddy tapes.
Oh boy.
And we were shocked because we'd never heard Maynard use that language. It, wow. So it's a freaky moment. And then Maynard sort of, he starts backpedaling a little bit, and then he just goes, oh, okay, signing off. That's all. He hangs up the mic. And so the bus is just silent. We just hear the wheels on the road, and the vibe is very weird, and the other musicians are very embarrassed for me, um, and I don't know what to do. I go back to the hotel, and I'm thinking, well, this was a mistake. I'll see if I can get back into school for the second semester. It's too late for the first semester, but I can move back. Maybe just start working again on my studies. Uh, and This next day was a travel day. That meant we would have a late departure, which allowed Maynard to sleep in. He rode the bus. Oftentimes, if in a big city, he'd stay in a nicer hotel. But in general, he suffered or endured what we were enduring. So at any rate, it's a travel day, and at 7 a.m. there's a knock at my door, and I open it, and there's Maynard Ferguson dressed up, almost like in a suit. and he starts. I couldn't, in his typical, almost being comical, but I wasn't quite sure what he was getting to. He says, I thought, and then he just stopped that, and he looked at me right in the eye. I said, "Did I yell at you last night?" And I said, "Yeah." And he puts his hand out. He says, "I hope you'll accept my apology."
Wow.
Maynard Ferguson got up early, got dressed to apologize to me, you know. So, I knew, like, okay, I'm not going to quit. This guy is incredible. That was really something. So I thanked him, and he said, "Okay, good. We're good." So he was a very smart band leader
Hmm.
and a very decent man. I always characterized him as the best boss I had, just if for nothing else, that one show of decency that he admitted he made a mistake, and we shook hands, and that was the end of that.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah,
Well, that's nice to hear, and I think, most people would realize that, what can you do if you're in a situation, you have to go with what you have to do, but hurting people's lives or hurting people's feelings unnecessarily. I mean, it's nice when you understand when you go in that territory, which is really unnecessary. But I'm
yeah. I
gonna,
mean, because I've f-bombed, and I don't know if I've made the effort to reach out to someone the next day and say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I did that."
yeah, I think that's a good lesson for all of us to, because we should always be on the positive. That should be the mantra, on the positive. But I'm
On
gonna
the positive.
turn
That's good. Maybe change the name of your podcast to be on the
on the
positive.
positive. Well, we're always on the positive path. But I
Hey,
wanted to
I have.
ask you,
Listen, I'm not trying to get any sympathy, but I wanted to explain to folks. Uh, Unfortunately, 2 days ago, I tested positive for COVID, and it's requiring that I drink a lot of water. I'm otherwise not feeling uh, any more brain fog than usual, I think. Um, and I tire a bit easily, but otherwise fairly asymptomatic. Um, as I mentioned to a friend, the one thing COVID seems to do is it tells your body that we're not in Kansas anymore.
yes, but also that we're finite, and
Yes, we are. We are
yes,
mortal. This is true.
yes, and how
It's
how important this moment is always.
Well. So anyway, I'm glad we're doing this by way of Zoom, because I'm isolating now. And,
Yes,
this was what we had to do, uh, due to the initial lockdown. I originally had a two-camera setup in my studio. My drums were actually facing that direction, and it was an analog system. So meaning that the little red, green, blue RCA outputs went into a converter, and that was my interface. Um, and I was making videos for the Artistworks company, and some, then I could do Zoom, but I wanted to use more cameras, and it seemed like, okay, I'm going to have to go the HDMI, digital output route. And Dave Weckel had been using a camera switcher that Roland offered, but he was having
great
some
system.
issues with it, and it was pricey. And all of a sudden, Black Magic came out with something called the ATEM, the ATEM. Um, and I got one of those, and then got some uh, Zoom cameras. And it turns out, if you have a nice Sony or Canon or Nikon camera at home, um, that's not a dedicated video camera. Many of these cameras will work um, quite quite well for podcasting or for video use. Or you just get a Zoom camera, like, and not the Zoom platform we're on, but the company Zoom. For example, this cam right here. It's just a nice, I call it my snare cam, is It's made by Zoom, and they're very small, and you can position them anywhere you like. And we had to do this because teaching, just speaking into the built-in camera on a laptop, um, wasn't very good, and the sound wasn't good. Uh, so we wanted to make a better teaching environment. Meanwhile, the students were still using the cameras built into their laptops. So the University of Southern California did one very good thing. Um, they started supplying students with cameras with microphones, um, and uh, that enriched the experience somewhat. Although many students were still relegated to the room that they went back to the empty nest homes, and all of a sudden
Right.
there they are with a drum set, and the parents weren't particularly pleased about that. So these kids are, they're set up in the basement or in the garage, and they seem to be the greatest distance from the Wi-Fi uh, transmitter. And anyway, what we came up with a solution that got us through the last part of the pandemic lockdown, and that was we created lesson pods on campus. And because no one really understood how the disease was transmitted, we we had two identical studios, which were almost replicas of what I had here. So a student could book it, and it would be a 3 hour window, which allowed them to use it and leave, and then a company would come in and sanitize it, and they'd refresh the air, and so students could come to school and book these rooms, and then we did our lessons on Zoom. We could record them. I could ask a student, um, "Hey, can you focus on the snare drum, or can I see the overhead view, or let me see what's happening with the pedals?" Sorry for that. Um,
Yes.
but
No, no, that's great. That
yeah, so it 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 was a good stopgap, and meanwhile, then this became a way of we had lots of meetings and forums, um, podcasts, of course, interviews, and then some recording projects. The recording projects generally didn't involve too much video, except it seemed like everyone, hey, make a video while you make this track. Um, and I think, Aldo, maybe we're irretrievably uh, too far down that road, but um, I'm more and more. I'm just pushing, like, if I record, I'm going to focus on the audio, because and when I post something now, I'm just getting more and more tempted to not try to make some video,
Mhm.
just for the sake of having a video. Um, uh, I don't think it's a particularly great way to listen to music, watching, you know,
Right. Yeah. It's a
bunch of
distraction.
screens. And I mean, it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I applaud the creativity of everyone that's done that. But when I want to listen to something, I don't need to look at, I don't need to,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's actually distracting more
yeah,
than
yeah,
anything
exactly.
else
Right.
because
And I
this
think
this
maybe people are starting to realize that, like, okay. And the other risk is that then people will actually listen through the speakers on their phone.
that's right. That's right. Yeah. Yes. After all of that.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
it's funny because in the old days, we would be like, somebody's going to play this record after one or two times. It'll be so noisy. Doesn't matter if the fade out's a little bit this or that. And then CDs came out, where I thought, ooh, that came back to haunt me. But now with iPhones, who cares? It's just a couple of
It
speakers on
does.
a
Yes.
phone.
But I mean, the one nice thing about this whole technology, where I mean, what you've done in your studio, and we've always obviously done our own variations of it. I mean, here, my studio here was our ensemble room for the school, and all of that I used to do and teach classes, and now it's become my playroom, my TV studio, my everything. Plus the fact that the technology now is such that we can go anywhere on the planet and nobody would know the difference. I can, wherever I travel now, I teach all my students from wherever I am. I may not have the 5 cameras or screens that I have, but you can still, with a minimum, do that, which is a nice thing. It's a nice thing to have.
It's well, yeah, and we needed it. We
Yeah,
needed to be able to see one another during the lockdown.
yeah.
And there's no going back, but I am sensing that as far as just pure music goes, that at least for me, the I don't feel so impelled or like there's such a great need for me to worry about the visual component too much.
Sure, sure. And there's also there's a new system out, a new platform. I don't know if you're aware of it, ELK, ELK, out of Sweden. It's live, completely live audio, with no delay, zero delay, as long as you're, I think, 3,000 miles or something like that.
What for
I'll
interactive playing?
absolutely interactive. I saw some demos. I
That seems like it's physics defying. I mean, the speed of sound is only uh, even the speed of light. I mean,
yes.
introduces uh, delay. But I'm going to start getting into territory that I'm not fully
No, but
qualified. But
what I'll do is, I mean, I've seen the demos and I was surprised.
elk,
And I've been speaking to the folks who have developed it, and I'm getting a system and trying it myself. So some of our people around me have been using it that I turned them on
oh,
to.
please introduce me to them.
Yeah,
Uh,
this is
boy,
something very interesting.
if they've figured out some way to latency is always the issue, and how should I put it? If someone's standing at the far end of this room, and this is just a 2-car garage space, um, it's 30 milliseconds of elapsed time for me to say something and for that person to hear it, right? 20 to 30 milliseconds, which is quick. Um, if I'm wanting to adjust the feel of something I've played, I really want the backbeat just to like doom, doom, if I'm playing a shuffle. I might say to the engineer, let's take the entire drum track and let's move it to the right, which means to delay it by 10 milliseconds. That's kind of a perfect amount of time. And it's amazing how much the feel will change. It just seems like, wow, it's really like in the pocket. Of course, you couldn't do this in the old days with analog. Um, I try not to abuse it, but it's an interesting thing to do occasionally. So if you can change the feel just by 10 milliseconds, um, there has to be some amount of delay because even if something can travel the speed of light, it still takes light some
Sure,
measurable
sure.
amount of time to go from Hawaii, let's say. Uh, I think maybe that was more than 3,000 miles, but they were somebody was trying to they were thinking, if they're in Hawaii and they're trying to play live with someone in New York, just physics doesn't matter how great the equipment is. There's actual
Sure.
physical.
I'm suspecting that there may be multiple points. I'm not sure, and I'm not sure about that number that I gave you, but I mean, from what I've seen and where we are, this is something really incredible. But I will turn you on to this, and you can be
Yeah,
the
please.
judge.
I didn't mean to
Yeah,
be a elk.
ELK, and I'll send you the info on them, and I think you'll find it interesting. In moving forward, in the interest of
I just found a Swedish elk. I got a lot of pictures of these moose.
moose, but that's a
Moose
Canadian
elk.
thing. I
Elk.
think they stole
Boy,
that
this
from
search
Canada.
isn't coming up with anything other than.
But I wanted to ask you, Peter, from going from Maynard Ferguson to Weather Report, that voyage, that trajectory, or that what took you there? I remember. No, before you answer that, I remember meeting you in New York at Manny's. Was it Manny's? And you were talking about moving to. I think you were looking at cymbals or instruments or something, and I was looking at something, and you were talking about moving to LA at the time.
Mm.
I'm not sure. I was trying to place that. Was that before you played with Weather Report or after? I don't remember.
I'm going to guess that was after,
Yeah.
because when I joined Weather Report, I didn't know where I was going to live, and if I'd been in New York, I would have probably still had been with Maynard. That would have been 1978
That
when I
sounds
knew
right.
him. Does that sound right for you?
Yes, yes.
No, then maybe I thought, well, soon I'll move out because that's where they were headquartered. Um, Jocko heard me play with Maynard in 1977, and he liked what he heard. In fact, you know what I'm going to do, just for fun. This will this may or may not make sense to folks, but I want to search for this track in my library. Let's see, somebody. Okay, check out this song.
Somebody been cutting on my groove. Yeah, they have. Don't you know they have now? I said somebody that cut it on me. Yeah, they did. I know they did it. Somebody's wearing my favorite shoes. He's stepping high and I'm singing the blues. Somebody's smoking my favorite pipe. He's talking heavy, I'm coming up wine. Oh, somebody been cutting on my groove. I'm gonna boogie now, get it on out of me. Oh, yes I will, y'all. Help me boogie. Ooh. I said somebody cutting on the groove. Yeah, they are.
Okay, see, the photos were distracting, right?
Absolutely, because I thought I saw Joni Mitchell. Is that
Yeah, I didn't have the. I was just
okay?
different picture. There were anyway. So that was a singer named Wayne Cochran, and Jocko had played with Wayne Cochran pretty early on. It was one of his first important gigs, and the drummer in that band was a guy named Alan Robinson, who came out of New Orleans.
Yeah.
Now, Alan, spelled Allyn, and Jocko were, rhythm section teammates. That recording of Alan was before Jocko had joined the band, but I listened to that quite a bit my freshman year at Indiana, because one of the I was really into Edgar Winter at the
Okay.
time, and wonderful drummer in that band, a guy named Bobby Ramirez. But there was a bass player at Indiana. He still plays in Chicago, Eric Hochberg, wonderful bass player. And he said, "Hey man, you guys got to check out Wayne Cochran." So I went to the record store and found Wayne Cochran, and I really liked this tune. So I know that it influenced the way I played the backbeat. And my theory, Aldo, was that when Jocko heard me playing with Maynard, he heard that influence. And it wasn't just because I heard Alan, but I listened to a lot of the same things Jocko and I discovered that he had growing up. So, much of my musical database or my rhythmic awareness was informed by many of the same things that informed Jocko's sense of spaces between notes and stuff. So, um, it, there were 1,000 drummers they could have chosen for that gig, but Jocko insisted that they give me a shot, and I think because he recognized he would be comfortable playing with me.
Right.
Right. So it just came down to that, and when they first called me, I turned it down. Because I was in the middle of a tour with Maynard, and I said, it's just scheduling doesn't work. It's too risky. If the weather was bad at the time, and if I can't get back to the Midwest, it's currently where there's a lot of snow going on. Maynard doesn't have a drummer for a gig, and I can't risk doing that. So, not the right time, fellas. Thanks, no thanks. Which I think sort of impressed them that I turned it down. That's the power of no. So they came back, and then the second time I said, all right, I gotta go for it. So here I am. I've played in 2 big bands, and when you're a big band drummer, you wait for someone to tell you what you're going to play, and it gets counted off. You have a certain amount of authority and experience being, somewhat the person in charge of things, but you're still a side person,
Right.
And when I showed up to that first rehearsal, if the band had been there and I got the drum set up, I'm sure I would have okay, what are we going to do? As it turned out, when I went to that first rehearsal, I got there early. And then I set up it was a new drum set. Slingerland had sent a new drum set for this occasion. And this guy came up and said, hey, the Joe and the fellows called. They're going to be a couple hours late. Okay, yeah. So instead of a 1:00 rehearsal, it was going to be like a 3:00 rehearsal. And then 3:00, the guys are sorry. So now it's almost 7:00.
Okay.
And they all walk in together. So they had convened, I think, in the parking lot. I don't know. I was indoors, and I meet the 3 of them, and Zavanel kind of glumly is checking me out. Not sure if he likes what he sees or not. Shakes my hand. Wayne Shorter was very friendly. Jocko just kind of waves, smiles, and runs back out the door. So I'm a bit puzzled, but now I'm also very bored. So Zavanel, ignoring me, kind of goes up and starts noodling with his keyboards. And I just went up to the drums and started playing, which surprised him. So the fact that they showed up so late and I was just kind of itching to do something with the day because I was tired of sitting around, worked very much in my favor. Jocko comes back with a 6-pack of Heineken beer. He'd gone to the liquor store. He looks up, I see him smile. He's like, oh, great. This is what I was hoping would happen. He puts the beer in a fridge. He jumps up on the stage. Now, the stage was just a couple feet above the floor level of the rest of the studios, SIR studios. And he turned to his, so he turns to his left, and this bass comes flying out of nowhere. He catches it, puts it on, and we start playing. And we launched into this impromptu medley. About, I don't know, I thought it was about 35, 40 minutes. It might have been less. I remember at one point I looked out and there was Tom Scott. I recognized him. And he's there just like with his mouth open. And I think Jocko had asked him, hey, come by and check out this drummer. Tell me if you think he's any good. And I'd done my homework, so whatever tune they started, they segued into, I was right there with them. And at the end of Gibraltar, play, and then Zavanel gives the kind of universal, we're gonna end it, boop 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 bap boop bap. So it's kind of sounded like we'd been playing together for a while already. They're laughing, they're high-fiving. Um, I knew that, okay, that went well. Um, and Joe said, we don't need to rehearse. Just come back tomorrow. We take a photo, and we go to
Okay.
because the band was scheduled to go to Japan. So as we're posing for the photo the next day, um, and meanwhile, Jocko had got me up early and said, we got to get you some better clothes, you know. So he takes me to this clothing store.
Okay.
I'm buying all these expensive clothes. Meanwhile, when we get out in the parking lot, Jocko shows me he's like shoplifted about 3 pair of pants. He's he just put on multiple pair of pants and he walked out the store with them. I was his cover. Um, as we're posing for this photo, I said, "Hey Joe, can I ask you a question?" Because I wanted to let the guys in Maynard's band know how things were going. And he goes, "Yeah, what?" I said, "Can I tell my friends I'm in the band?" And he said, "You can tell your friends you're going to Japan."
Good.
That was as far as he was willing to commit. And so I said, "Okay, fine." And we went to Japan. Um, and then shortly after that, let me see. Do I have a photo of us in Japan? Oh, here's a photo. Yeah, this is my second night on the band.
And Jocko flying. Yes.
Yeah,
I-
I mean that was in Osaka, and it was pretty darn good. Um, and then they invited me to become a permanent member. By the time we went to Japan, we played Australia, and then we were in Hawaii. We played one concert in Hawaii, and I just remember going to a Chinese restaurant with Little Feet. They shared the same management, and I got to know those guys a little bit. So it was just a lot of fun. All of a sudden, being in going from a sideman. And the only thing I needed to learn, Aldo, after all this was, in Maynard's band, you would sign your name on a photo or a poster or a program book. You'd sign your name and your instrument because there were, 14, 15 other musicians who wanted to distinguish who you were.
right.
And that was just a habit I had. So there was a weather report poster and I signed it Peter Erskine and I wrote the word drums underneath. And Joe goes, wait a minute. He goes, what's this? Drums? Well, who the hell else would be playing drums? Don't ever do that again.
That's a good one. That's a good
I
one.
had a lot to learn.
But later on, I mean, you also played with a lot of people. I mean, Chick Corea, Michel Bublé, Gary Burton, Diana Krall, Boss Skaggs. I mean, Steely Dan. I mean, I can go on and on. But you've reached. I mean, you've played with pretty much a wide gamut of musical situations, not just one style. I mean, Greg Bisonet was kind of the same, but you were even wider because you're in the jazz idiom. You know that
No, he's playing in Ringo's band. That's
Yes.
there aren't too many drummers that can make that claim. Yeah, and Greg is much more of an authentic rock drummer. Um, if I'm on a film score, I can do a passable job, but I'm more of a acoustic jazz musician, and so when it comes to small group stuff, um, I think I just have a lot more flight hours doing that. So that's my area of, I would say, most authority. Um, but not every style. I used to want to regard myself as I could play any style of music, and then I was joking I was going to make business cards. The drummer plays all styles, and then I was going to add parenthetically, some under protest.
but
But now I had to be honest and say, well, there's some things that are much better played by other drummers. So you get to know your limitations, um, and so I'm trying to become a little more selective. Sometimes when people contact me, we want you to play drums on a recording. I'll say, let me hear the music to make sure I'm the right drummer for your
Right,
project.
right.
And that's not just a diplomatic way to get out of something. It really is an honest, I mean, I was doing something, and the guy said, yeah, I want you to play solo brushes, but I want it to be really, really fast and flashy." And I just said, "You're not going to get that." I said, "What you see is what you get, and that's not the way I play brushes. So, if you want that, you know, I'll play something. If you want to overdub somebody else, that's fine. That's
Right,
just
right.
not. There's just some things that don't compute anymore, and I'm getting better at recognizing some of those situations before I even walk in the studio.
Hmm. But I mean, you've obviously, obviously, I mean, done your homework, and I don't believe in coincidences, and I think you highlighted one really, really well because I'm a big one on there's no such thing as coincidence. I mean, the fact
Oh,
that you
I,
and
I I think there's some coincidences.
well, my opinion.
I
Uh,
mean, if I was a police detective, I would think there were no such thing as coincidence.
no, but listen, you said it very well. You had been listening to all of this music, which aligned with what Jacko had been listening. And here's the situation. To me, that's not a coincidence. That's a preparation. Of course, not
Yeah.
not uh, not planned. But had you not done that, it may not have happened.
Right. I mean, I was fortunate that one of the trumpet players on Maynard's band had played on Jocko's first album. I was fortunate he called up Jocko, and he was only going to leave a message. He didn't expect Jocko to pick up the phone, and instead Jocko did. And then when he invited Jocko, "Hey, would you like to come see the band?" Jocko said, "No, that's okay. I caught, I heard you guys the last time you were in town." It was this trumpet player, Ron Tooley, who said, "Hey, you know what? We got a new drummer. You might want to check this guy out." So it was really all thanks to Ron, um, that got Jocko there in the first place, and then we hit it off, and then he heard something he liked, and you know how it is out. I mean, when you meet with a student, or if you're going to a concert, um, generally you get a pretty accurate sense of a musician's
Hmm.
capabilities, as well as his or her depth of experience, maybe,
Yeah.
and the amount of ownership that they have, within a few seconds. I mean,
Sure.
you can kind of, ooh, wow, you
Oh
know.
no, of course. And then you having had this depth of preparation. I mean, I'll give you an example that just came to mind when we were thinking you were playing the Montreal Drum Festival, and then we thought, well, let's invite a drummer in this one tune that we wanted to do that was totally electric, and you were going to be there, and I mean, Dave Garibaldi was there, and a whole bunch of other drummers were there. And I reached out to you and everyone agreed. I said, yeah, he would be perfect for this, just because you have such finesse in your playing, your sound, all of that, that that would be really interesting to hear what you would sound like with repercussion in this one tune.
Mhm.
And we didn't have much time to rehearse it. I sent it to you, and I think you worked it out on the plane on the way here.
How'd I do?
You made the band, but you couldn't stay. No,
I
it was
couldn't
great.
what?
You made the band, but you couldn't stay. I was just kidding. It
No.
sounded great. No, it was really great but here's the problem. In that particular tune, I was normally playing drums, but in that particular tune, because you were playing as a special guest, I was playing a secondary mallet part, which were all synthesized, and it was something we've been working with. So then once we took it back out on the road, I had to follow up what you did. So that was
Oh, I'm sure you did fine.
thank you, Peter. But it was brilliant. I loved what you did, and these subtleties that you have. That a great musician is always searching for how to make something groove and how to make something work. And you
Well,
know,
I appreciate the compliment. Thank you. Um, the what I tell my students, uh, is, hey, we could reduce the whole year into one sentence. Um, and they're intrigued, and they say, okay, what's that? I say, just play what you'd like it to sound like. What would you like to hear? What do you want it to sound like? Um,
Hmm.
don't what you might think I want it to sound like. You have no idea. You can't tell. And um, if you have some informed sense of what you're doing, then you just be honest. Play what you want it to sound like, and then you at least have a good firm base, and then you make adjustments. You can, but if you dangle yourself out there trying to play it for what I imagine or what does somebody else want, um, then it's just not an easy place to navigate musically from. Because who
Yeah,
knows what somebody else wants, and
sure,
who knows who's listening to it. If I fill up my mind with that, I can't concentrate on the music.
sure. But I mean, making it sound what you think would be like, or what you would like it to sound like, implies that you have made an incredible amount of preparation for yourself, so that you have things to draw from. No,
Maybe
or not?
maybe it's just like I like this, and um, and then someone will say, "Well, can you do that?" I mean, uh, I've been on the sound stage at Warner Brothers. You've got an 80-piece orchestra. You play something. It's a film score. And they go, Peter, we don't like what you're doing. Can you come up with something else? Okay, you know, and then
Yeah,
I had a student once that complained that they said he didn't like the lessons because he felt I had too many gotcha moments. Like I was trying. I said, hey, this whole business is a gotcha. For example, that. All right, we don't like what you're doing, and you've got one more chance.
that's right.
And so, all right, well, this, and luckily it worked. But I started from my place, so I had okay, that didn't work, so then I can make an adjustment. But if I start without really having an idea of how to approach it rhythmically or otherwise, then I haven't taken a breath. Then it's just like starting a drum solo, like whoo, and then your hands are moving and you're running on a treadmill. And I can sense it when students are playing. Like you're doing everything to avoid that train on the tracks uh, catching up to you. Um, Take a breath.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, just like what do you want it to sound like?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And
That's simple.
from another, taking your journey and what you've done. I mean, aside from all the playing and teaching, you've also, as an entrepreneur, you have a label. You've also, I have an app that you released once, a jazz play, which is fabulous. I still use
On
it.
the playlist, yes. To anyone who has our apps, we've run into a situation with the operating system 16, which the new iPads and new iPhones are utilizing. Apple has changed something dramatically in the architecture of how these devices handle the audio content. Um, so we have a compatibility issue right now, and it's breaking my heart because if we can't figure it out, then our app business and also this Moises app I told you about takes any piece of music and makes it a play along. Now, our apps, some of them go further because you can mix out the second trumpet part and
Right.
play that for the big band app. But for drummer apps, uh, it's a brand new world with this with the ability to take any piece of audio, and it does a pretty good job of scrubbing or just creating these individual
Interesting. Yeah.
stems. So, yeah, that took us by surprise. That kind of made me feel like we thought we were modern, we were horse and carriage, and now
Well, it's moving so fast, Peter, that
it sure
we can't
is.
expect to be in the same spot 5 years later or any time later.
Oh,
It's
God, the Swedes, boy. And this Moises was, I think, developed in Brazil. Just a lot of really smart people out there in the world.
yeah, yeah. And you've also written a whole lot of books, and I mean, we're what I'm basically saying is, I mean, we've enlarged our net of what we do and what we enjoy doing, right?
Hey,
Publishing
you know what?
books and
Taking pictures is the thing that brings me the most pleasure. I still love playing the drums. I love teaching. I'm leaving university at the end of the school year. I'll do occasional master classes there, and I'll teach whenever somebody wants to bring me in to do some teaching. I still enjoy that, but I have a grandson now, and I just want to spend
wow.
time with our grandson and teaching him to be a drummer. Uh,
History
Otherwise,
repeats.
taking photos. There's a couple more books that I have, and one of them being a photo book. I've got so many great pictures over the years, not just of the other people have taken, but ones I've been uh, lucky enough or fortunate enough or that I had the wherewithal because in a lot of these bands, like Weather Report, for example, I was the only guy with a camera.
Okay.
So I was constantly, or not as constantly now as I wish I had, and I wish I'd figured out a better camera. Um, but some of these pictures are pretty good, and a lot of what I'm doing now, and I started this during the pandemic, was uh, getting into editing. I mean, this isn't edited, but there's a Mike and Randy Brecker. That's a kind of an unscripted
Wow.
moment. And then editing the images, and there was a great bass player named Milt Hinton, and he was quite a photographer, and he put out a book quite a few years ago because he was that fly on the wall, and some of the only photos we have of a lot of these musicians were thanks to his having a camera. So um, uh, I've got some pretty great photos. I'd like to share them beyond Facebook. So that's if I can find a publisher. That's what I'm trying to figure out. That next step, is how to do that. But otherwise, it's the technology and my studio. I'm gonna. It's still a work in progress. I love this drum set that I have here. This is a this Tama. Uh, I think they called it a Neomod. It was a 10 by 22 that worked really well in this room. Very nice sounding drums, but not their best sounding drums. And I played on a kit at PASIC, and I liked it so much. And Thomas said, "If you like it, we'll send it to you." He's very
Nice.
generous, and it's just a 14 by 22, a 12-inch rack and a 16-inch floor. I said, "Yeah, just let's." So 4-piece kit, and my new thing, ultimately. Now here you can see I've got you can't see that I've got a little crash over here, um, but ultimately, Aldo, I may just go to one cymbal and a hi hat.
Wow.
I it's going to be hard to live a drumming life without a 22-inch swish, so I may need to include that. But yeah,
But you have
uh,
such a great touch, and I'm sure you can play on anything and
I
it'll
love these
sound great.
cymbals, but yeah, just gotta just find my favorite 18-inch and
Less is more.
a nice pair of hats, and yeah, and I'm a happy camper. I'm playing some new hats at the PACER conference. Very lightweight top that were great. I think when all's said and done, I always just go back to new beats. So that's
Speaking of
there.
PASIC, though, I wanted to congratulate you on on the great award of
Oh, the
one
Hall of Fame. That
the
was
Hall
fun.
of Fame, of course. And I was there, and I saw you at the corner of my eye as I was walking, but you were talking to someone. I didn't want to interrupt. I thought I would run into you afterwards, but that didn't happen. But big congratulations on that
Thank
one.
you. Wasn't that fun to be able to be back at the conference and see all our old buddies?
Oh, yes. And then people would say to me, "Well, Aldo, you're back." I says, "Yes, I wanted to see people in 3D." You know, they started laughing, but I was serious.
Yeah.
You know?
Three-dimensionality is where it's at, man.
Yeah, 3D. Imagine that. It's a new
Well, I've got my daughter is an actress. Some of you may know her from her television show called Pen 15. And if you haven't seen it, it's very funny. She's working on a new series with Donald Glover. Excuse me. They were filming in New York for a few months. Now they're in northern Italy. And I'm going to take off next week, doing a few master classes to pay for my flight, and then joining her on location. And it's going to be a very nice way to end the year.
Yes.
Watching her do some work, and my wife's already over there, so I've been a bachelor, and as I mentioned, unfortunately, I tested positive for COVID, but this was a blessing in disguise. I mean, it's kind of a perfect week. I'm missing American Thanksgiving. Just me and the dog. But it's a good week just to catch up on some needed rest, and I'll be free as a bird, ready to fly next week.
And Italy, that's a great destination. I was just there. I go often now because we have a place in Calabria.
Ooh,
Yes, sir. Right on the 300 steps
you
from
have
the
a
Ionia.
place? Wow, good for
Yes,
you.
sir. And I was just there. I was just doing some work in Venice and Rome and a few other places. And so I'm going back more often. And of course, I speak the language, and I was born in Italy, of course. And it just felt like home. I won't even talk about the food, Peter. You know about the food. So
Are you kidding?
I won't even go there. But
So that's
culture.
not that long of a trip from Montreal, right?
No, it's 6 hours.
Nice.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah, it's
there's
a
an
little longer
airport
from
close
here,
by,
right?
45 minutes, international airport. So fabulous.
Well, I wish you buon viaggio, I guess you would say.
Buon viaggio. See?
Buon viaggi. Good travels, and we know good food and good
Yes.
wine and all those good things.
Yes.
Now, Maya's, she's working up in the north. I think she had a good time in Milan, but she was in Lake Como for a while.
Oh,
and
beautiful, beautiful.
it's beautiful, but she said, I like the food more in the south.
Of course. Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm from Calabria, and from Naples down is the real deal. All of it. Yeah. I mean, in the
it's
north
pretty
is good too. I
Yep,
mean,
Naples down.
Yes. But in the south,
But,
they're just,
but Bologna is pretty special.
oh, they are all incredible. But there's something about Naples down that's different, on all kind of levels. It's theater, it's culture, it's like all of those things. And also there's a lot of great musicians over there. So it makes it really interesting now. Anyway, Peter, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to do this and catching up and telling us about your trajectory and some of the stories. I mean, we can go on probably forever, but
we mentioned Italian musicians. Let me play a little bit. I'm so proud of. This is a track I did years ago with the late great Pino Daniele.
Oh,
okay.
one of my favorites. One of my favorites, Pino. Really miss him.
Se mi guardi con gli occhi dell'amore, non ci lasceremo più. Inganneremo il tempo ed il dolore, sia l'estate che l'inverno. E cambieremo il mondo ogni volta che vuoi. E fermeremo il mondo ogni volta che vuoi, yeah. Perché non so che dire quando mi guardi così, non riesco mai a finire un discorso senza errori, perché mi fai impazzire quando mi guardi così, mi sembra di capire che voglio solo te in questo mondo, voglio solo te in questo mondo. Se mi cerchi con gli occhi dell'amore.
Beautiful.
Nice music, huh?
Beautiful. Which album is that, Peter?
The album was called Yes, I Know My Way.
Okay.
And
I have
much
most
of it
of his
was
albums.
he re-recorded some old hits. That was a hit single. And for a few years afterwards, if I mentioned that in an Italian restaurant, I always got a really good seat.
Of
Good
course.
table.
Well, he was huge. I mean, he would fill stadiums of 80,000 people. I mean, he was huge.
He was
And-
great, and he was a big jazz fan. We lost him way too soon.
Yeah.
It was a real tragedy that he passed. That track, by the way, it was funny. I was in Vienna with my family, Maya and our son Taichi. They were quite small, and we were about to take a train from Vienna to Rome. My sister lived in Rome, and a fax was forwarded to me, or it might have been an email. I can't remember, but from a record company executive, and he said, "Peter, we're just wondering if you might be available at some point in the future to record with Pino Daniele. Would you be interested?" And I said, I got back in touch with them, and I just said, "Well, yeah. I mean, I'll be in Rome tomorrow." They were like, "What?" So we very quickly organized a recording session the day after Christmas. The local Zildjian rep thought it was for a television appearance. So when I got to the studio, the cymbals were each cymbal was two cymbals like glued or welded to one another. That was their TV set. So I was like, uh-oh. So I have to admit, the cymbals on that recording were all UFIPs that the studio had sitting around. And it was a lot of fun, and that led to about 4 or 5 albums. I think about 4 albums I did with Pino.
Nice.
He was a lovely guy, and yeah, I mean, Italian musicians. Wow, Rita Marcotulli, Enrico Rava.
Oh,
Drummer. You know Roberto Gatto, great drummer.
yes, of course, Roberto. And do you know Tullio Di Piscopo? He was the Pino Daniele's original drummer.
Yes. We've always said hello to
Yeah.
usually by way of Rita, because
Okay.
she worked a lot with Tullio. And
Well-
Rita worked with Pino as well.
Yeah. But Tullio was, he went on to become his own. He was like the Phil Collins in Italy. He's a great drummer and singer. I worked with him a couple.
Yes,
I worked with him
he had
a
a
couple
big
of
hit,
times.
right?
A couple of, yeah, he was huge too. He was like that kind of guy who was like great singer, Napolitan, right? From Naples.
There you go.
I mean, I'm not
magic
Napolitan,
ingredient.
but some of these guys, I mean, wow.
Well, this has been fun. You were doing a sign off, and I interrupted you. so I
No.
apologize.
It's fantastic that you brought that in. Mike Maynard also surprised me because out of the blue, I mean, I know Pino Daniele's music. I have all the records. And Tullio Di Piscopo, I know a lot of those guys. And I've worked with Tullio many times in Montreal and over there. And then Mike Maynard brought out the name. He says, well, this guy, same idea. He says, they called me. We were playing in Naples. And the producer said, there's a guy who wants to sit in with the band. His name is Pino Daniele. And Mike didn't know who he was, right? And Pino's was a great jazz fan. And so, I mean, the story goes that later on, of course, they became great friends. And Mike
Well,
also
Mike produced 2 albums that I
Yes.
worked on.
Yes, and it's all of a sudden I'm saying, wow, what a small world we live in, Peter.
Yeah, yeah. I got to see Mike when I visited my daughter on location in New York just a couple months ago, and we had a wonderful breakfast meeting, Mike's family and mine. And so, yeah, Mike. After Weather Report, Mike really became the center of my whole New York thing, and for years afterwards, I'm glad that we're still in touch.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do. Let's get together another time. We can pick up the story from Weather Report.
Yeah, that would be great. If you have the time, you're on.
Yeah, I'm sorry to invite myself. I hope that wasn't.
Oh, Peter,
presumptuous.
if you don't have to invite yourself, just say, what are you doing next this particular date, and we'll make it happen. Life
right.
is short, man.
If there's enough demand, and if I haven't bored all your listeners too much, anyway, all this water I drank, I think I need to make a hasty exit. So let's wrap this up.
That's a good one. Thank you so much, Peter. But as we say, to be continued.